In the middle of the vast desert, a group of boys were digging holes in the sand under the scorching sun. Suddenly, a rattlesnake appeared nearby, and a boy, who could no longer stand the hard work, took off his shoe to touch the snake. As a result, he lost his life. Meanwhile, in the city, Stanley was walking when suddenly a pair of shoes fell from somewhere and hit him on the head, causing him to fall. Because his father was researching a cure for smelly feet, Stanley decided to take the shoes home. But at that very moment, the police suddenly arrived. They said these shoes belonged to a famous baseball player and had been stolen from a charity event. Therefore, the police believed Stanley was the culprit. The police took Stanley home and informed his family of the incident. However, Stanley's family did not seem too surprised and instead blamed a curse that had haunted their lineage. Here, the police also noticed suspicious things. His father had an entire room filled with dozens of pairs of shoes, and Stanley had posters of the baseball star all over his walls. With such coincidental evidence, Stanley was brought to court. Here, he was given two choices: either go to jail or spend 18 months at Camp Green Lake for juvenile offenders. Of course, Stanley chose to go to the camp because it was gentler than going to jail anyway. Very soon after, the bus carrying him crossed the vast desert filled with holes. He arrived at a small, shady town, where all the boys wore prison uniforms. Stanley met the warden's right-hand man, Mr. Sir, who explained to him how things worked at the camp. The camp had no guard towers or fences because it was surrounded only by desert, stretching for hundreds of miles, with no water source, so no one dared to escape. Stanley was issued exactly 2 sets of clothes and a shovel for digging holes. Every day, he had to dig a hole exactly 5 feet deep and measure it with that very shovel. The longer he dug, the longer he would have to expose himself to the harsh sun. In addition, Stanley also had to be careful to stay away from rattlesnakes and the yellow-spotted lizard species, as they could kill him. After that, Stanley met the camp counselor, Dr. Pendansky, who gave him a tour and emphasized the #1 rule: never upset the warden. Pendansky assigned other boys to take Stanley to where he would sleep, a spot that still had the faint vomit stain of the child who had died before. Dr. Pendansky called the boys by their real names, but they only called each other by the nicknames they got here. The youngest boy, Zero, had that nickname because he almost never spoke. When Stanley asked where to get water for his canteen, he accidentally called another boy by his real name. He was immediately pushed to remind him that here, they were only to be called by their nicknames. At dinner time, Stanley received a ration consisting only of beans cooked in various ways. Peter snatched his food, claiming he deserved it more because Stanley hadn't had to dig a hole today. The boys asked Stanley why he was sent here, and when he replied that he was accused of stealing the famous player's shoes, Zero suddenly asked if they had a red X mark on them. That question shocked everyone. Stanley confirmed, and in his mind, he recalled the trial when the baseball star had mentioned growing up in an orphanage. That was why he often donated to charity events. That night, Stanley couldn't sleep and remembered his grandfather's words that their family was cursed, which was why his father never succeeded with his inventions. Even his great-grandfather was unlucky. He had once made a fortune in the stock market, but was then murdered by a notorious criminal nicknamed Kissin' Kate. She had a habit of kissing her victims after killing them, leaving a bright red lipstick mark on their faces. However, Kate did not kill Stanley's great-grandfather, so he didn't get a kiss. She only stole the treasure chest and left him to die of thirst in the desert. The next morning, the boys were woken up while it was still dark to start work. Each received a cake for breakfast and a shovel. But when Stanley took one, Peter immediately pushed him away and grabbed it. It turned out to be Peter's shovel. It was shorter, and he didn't let anyone else use it. When the group arrived at the digging spot, Mr. Sir explained to Stanley that if he found anything interesting while digging, he had to report it. If the warden liked the item, he would get the rest of the day off. However, Mr. Sir also affirmed that they were not digging to find anything specific, but simply to build character. After that, all the boys started working. When they scooped up the dirt, they would sometimes accidentally toss it into another's hole. Stanley tried to remind everyone to be more careful, not to throw dirt into his hole, but they all just laughed at him. While diligently digging, Stanley thought again about the family curse. His ancestor, Ilya, had once worked on a pig farm and fell in love with the owner's daughter, Myra. Therefore, Ilya sought out a local fortune teller named Zoroni for advice on how to win the girl's heart. Zoroni told him to give up and go to America to find his destiny. But Ilya refused to give up and still went to ask for Myra's hand in marriage. The owner refused because at that time another suitor had brought a large pig as a dowry. Seeing Ilya sad, Zoroni took pity and taught him a little trick. Every day, Ilya had to carry a piglet up a mountain to let it drink from a stream while singing a tune to it. As the days went by, Ilya would grow stronger, and the pig would grow bigger and become the best dowry. After giving the pig to the owner, Ilya had to return to carry Zeroni up the mountain so she could also drink the water. If he broke his promise, a curse would befall him and all his descendants. Ilya followed the instructions for several days. The pig grew larger and he immediately brought it to the owner. But unfortunately, both Ilya's pig and his rival's were exactly the same size. The owner then let Myra choose her own husband. Myra didn't know who to choose, so she proposed a number-guessing game to decide. Her superficial and shallow attitude deeply offended Ilya. He finally decided to go to America, just as Zeroni had advised from the beginning. Unfortunately, before he left, he forgot his promise to carry Zeroni up the mountain, which angered her and made her curse his family for all eternity. Back in the present, Mr. Sir drove his truck to the holes to let the boys fill their canteens. He mocked Stanley because his hands were already covered in blisters after just one day of digging. The first one to finish digging was Zero, so fast that the boys joked he must have been eating the dirt to be that quick. When Stanley finally finished his hole, no one helped him climb out, forcing him to learn how to climb up on his own. Returning to the town, Stanley saw Mr. Sir pointing a gun at him, but he was actually aiming at a yellow-spotted lizard. The first shot missed. The lizard puffed up its neck and charged towards Stanley. But Mr. Sir fired another shot and killed it. Day after day passed, and Stanley gradually got used to the harsh rhythm of the camp. He woke up early in the morning, ate hard-to-swallow cooked beans, and then dug holes all day until his hands blistered in more places. Sometimes dangerous animals appeared, and sometimes the showers didn't even work. The other boys frequently teased Stanley, calling him weak. To avoid trouble, Stanley just endured it silently. In the letters he sent home to his mother, he even lied that he was having a wonderful summer at a normal summer camp. One afternoon, Stanley happened to find a fossil and brought it to Pendanski. But the doctor said the warden didn't care about fossils at all. He added that this place used to be a lake and the surrounding land had belonged to the warden's grandfather. This opens up a flashback. The town was once bustling and full of life. A merchant named Sam used to bring his horse-drawn cart here to sell special onions that he claimed could cure all diseases and even repel the deadly lizard species. Sam fell in love with the local schoolteacher, Catherine, and always brought her a separate bag of onions. In return, Catherine would give him a jar of peaches she had picked herself. Most of the men in town liked Catherine, and they didn't like the special attention Sam received from her. One rainy day, Catherine had to send her students home early because the school roof was leaking, and Sam volunteered to fix it. Thanks to that, he had more opportunities to be with Catherine, gradually growing closer to her, and then began to help fix other damaged parts of the school. However, every evening when Catherine taught her adult class, Sam had to witness men constantly making rude comments to her. The warden's grandfather, Walker, even directly asked her out, but Catherine's refusal angered him. Gradually, the schoolhouse became the most beautiful building in town, but Sam lost his mule, so he had to use a boat instead. On another rainy afternoon, Sam and Catherine finally had enough courage to share a kiss, unaware that Walker had witnessed it and immediately spread the news throughout the town. Within a few hours, the men of the town gathered and burned down the schoolhouse as punishment. A frantic Catherine ran to the sheriff for help, but he was drunk and even demanded that she kiss him. When Catherine pushed him away, he mocked her, insulted Sam, and reminded her that interracial relationships were illegal and Sam would surely be executed. Terrified, Catherine rushed to warn Sam, but it was too late. He had been shot and killed while he was on his boat. Sometime later, Catherine returned, shot the sheriff dead, and then placed on his lips the kiss he had once desired. After that, she left town and became the notorious outlaw known as Kissin' Kate. Back in the present, Peter came to Stanley and told him that next time he found something, he had to give it to him. Later in town, Stanley accidentally fell into a boy who often bullied him and almost got into a fight. But the other boys immediately intervened, and from then on, Stanley earned the group's respect. They gave him the nickname Caveman. He was even given a better spot in the waterline. A short time later, Stanley received a letter from his mother. In it, she wrote that his father's experiment was still failing and their landlord might evict them soon. Meanwhile, Zero saw Stanley reading the letter. He then confessed that he had never learned to read and asked Stanley to teach him. But Stanley refused, saying he wasn't a good teacher, and besides, he was exhausted at the end of each day and needed to rest. During another digging session, Stanley suddenly discovered a small object with the letters KB engraved on it. The boys guessed it might be a handgun shell casing, but it was too thin. Peter immediately snatched it, despite Stanley's protests. When Pendanski saw it, he immediately reported it to his superior. The warden quickly appeared, and all the boys were amazed because she was a beautiful woman. She was very pleased with the discovery, gave Peter the day off, and ordered the rest of them to excavate the entire area around Peter's hole. That afternoon, the boys worked harder than usual, but they found nothing because it wasn't the right location. In the following days, they had to continue digging in the tunnel they had opened, but the only thing they found was a small knob. Finally, the warden gave up and ordered the boys to go back to digging their individual holes as before. The next day, while Mr. Sir was filling their canteens with water, a boy secretly stole a bag of sunflower seeds from the truck. When Mr. Sir left, the group shared them, but soon after, he discovered the bag was missing and turned the truck around. The boys quickly hid the bag but accidentally spilled it right at Stanley's feet, so he tried to cover it with sand. When Mr. Sir returned, he still saw seeds scattered on the ground. Stanley surprisingly took the blame for his friend, stunning everyone. Immediately, Mr. Sir took him to the warden to be punished. Inside her office were posters of Kissin' Kate hanging everywhere. The warden showed Stanley her special nail polish that she made herself, which contained rattlesnake venom. After painting her nails, she suddenly slapped Mr. Sir right across the face for daring to interrupt Stanley's digging over something as silly as a few sunflower seeds. Then she calmly let Stanley go back to digging. When Stanley returned to the digging area, the boys looked at him like a hero, and Zero had already finished digging his hole for him. To thank him, Stanley agreed to teach Zero how to read. The next time he met Mr. Sir, the man revealed 2 horrific scars on his face caused by the warden's venomous fingernails. He was so angry that he refused to put water in Stanley's canteen. Meanwhile, Stanley remembered what he had seen in the warden's office and thought that the small metal tube he had found was Kissin' Kate's lipstick. Another flashback appears. Kate only killed those involved in Sam's death and the burning of the schoolhouse. However, she also robbed many times, and after taking the treasure chest from Stanley's great-grandfather, she buried it where the lake used to be. While resting, Kate was caught by Walker and his wife. By then, the town had fallen into ruin after the lake dried up on the very day Sam died, plunging them into poverty. Instead of killing them, Kate chose a sweeter revenge. She let a lizard bite her, taking the secret of the treasure's location with her to the grave. Thus, Walker and all his descendants would have to dig forever in vain in this vast desert. Stanley began teaching Zero to read and write. Zero revealed that his real name was Hector Zeroni, meaning he was a descendant of the fortune teller Zeroni from long ago. Because Zero dug holes very quickly, he started helping Stanley. This made the other kids jealous. One afternoon, Zero talked about his mother. She had worked very hard to raise him, but then one day, she suddenly disappeared. Since then, Zero had been living on the streets. A short time later, one of the bullies started picking on Stanley again, claiming he only finished his hole because he got help. Stanley confronted him, and Pendanski even encouraged them to fight it out. While wrestling on the ground, Stanley was quickly overpowered, forcing Zero to jump in to save his friend, nearly killing the opponent. Pendanski fired a warning shot to stop it, and soon the warden appeared. The boys said that Zero had been helping Stanley dig, but Stanley quickly explained that it was just in exchange for him teaching Zero to read. However, the warden was furious, and Pendanski relentlessly mocked Zero, calling him stupid. Having been pushed too far for too long, Zero finally snapped, hit Pendanski with his shovel, and ran away into the desert. Mr. Sir wanted to go after him, but the warden stopped him, saying that Zero had no relatives, and they could just erase his records and pretend he never existed. That evening, the boys discussed how Zero would surely die in the desert. Stanley was constantly worried, remembering the story of his great-grandfather who had survived for 16 days in the desert after being robbed by Kate. It was said that he had found a shelter called God's Thumb, but no one knew what that was because he was nearly insane when he was found. The next day, a new kid arrived to take Zero's place, which annoyed Stanley, so he decided to make a plan. When Mr. Sir came to fill the canteens, Stanley suddenly jumped into the truck and drove off. Mr. Sir immediately clung to the car door. Stanley tried to push him off, but due to the distraction, the truck plunged into a hole. Unwilling to give up, Stanley got out of the truck and ran straight into the desert while the other kids cheered. When the warden heard the news, she ordered Mr. Sir to report Stanley missing after 2 weeks, because by then there would be nothing left to find. Under the burning sun, Stanley persisted, ignoring the venomous lizards around him. He finally discovered Sam's boat, and underneath it was Zero, exhausted to the point of collapse, but still alive. Because for a long time, Zero had been surviving on jars of peach jam, the very peaches Kate had given to Sam years ago, now preserved in glass jars. After Stanley ate some as well, he suddenly saw a mountain in the distance, shaped like a thumb, and immediately realized it was the place where his ancestor had survived. The 2 boys left the boat and began to climb the mountain, an incredibly arduous task. Stanley slipped and nearly fell, but Zero quickly held out the shovel to pull his friend up. Unfortunately, this action injured Zero's hand, so Stanley tried to bandage it for him with what he could. They continued for a while, but soon Zero grew weaker and fell. Stanley managed to catch him before he rolled away, but by this time he was too exhausted and passed out. Unwilling to give up, Stanley carried his friend on his back and brought Zero to the top of the mountain, just as his ancestor had once carried the pig. Finally, Stanley saw a patch of green and discovered a small stream with fresh, clear water and Sam's delicious onions. He immediately woke Zero up, and they both ate and drank to regain their strength. Stanley even sang a song his family always liked, not knowing it was the very pig lullaby that had been passed down through generations. Now, the spirit of Zeroni could finally rest in peace. As the curse was broken, the third Stanley completed his invention, finding an effective cure for foot odor by combining peaches with onions, making the whole family overjoyed. The next morning, Zero made a big confession. He was the one who had stolen the shoes. He had seen the shoes being donated to the orphanage and took them, not knowing they were so famous. However, the police quickly gave chase, so he threw them off a bridge, and they accidentally landed on Stanley. The next day, Zero was arrested while stealing shoes from another store. Stanley wasn't angry. On the contrary, he saw it as fate and was happy that it had happened that way. Meanwhile, Stanley's lawyer arrived at the correctional facility to pick him up after the court confirmed his innocence. The warden angrily sent the lawyer away, but the lawyer promised to return with backup. As for Stanley and Zero, once they had recovered, they both returned to the digging area and went to the hole where Stanley had found the lipstick tube. After many hours of digging, they were delighted to discover the treasure chest. Just then, the warden and Mr. Sir found them, but a swarm of venomous lizards crawled out, covering the two boys and the chest to protect them. The warden decided to wait for the lizards to bite the boys to death and recounted a story of how her grandfather used to make her dig even on Christmas as a child. The next morning, the lizards still hadn't bitten the two boys. The wait was suddenly interrupted when the lawyer returned with the police. The warden made up a story that the boys had stolen the chest from her office and run away. But Zero proved the truth by pointing to the name engraved on it, which was also the name of Stanley's great-grandfather. They then returned to town, and the lawyer put the chest in his car before announcing their departure. However, Stanley refused to leave the camp without Zero. Therefore, the lawyer requested Zero's file. Upon discovering the file was missing, the police immediately called for an investigation and found that Mr. Sir was a fugitive on the run, and Pendansky was not a real doctor. So both of them, along with the warden, were arrested. At that very moment, it began to rain after decades of drought, and the boys rushed outside, celebrating with joy. A few days later, Stanley and Zero, along with their families, opened the chest, which contained a great deal of wealth, including stocks of enormous value. Stanley wanted to share the treasure equally with Zero, and the family agreed. The first thing Zero did with the money was hire a private detective to find his mother, resulting in a very moving reunion. A short time later, the correctional facility was closed down, and the boys were sent to places that offered real counseling and therapy. Stanley's and Zero's families moved next to each other in a wealthy neighborhood. Their friends from the camp also visited often. Stanley's father's invention became a resounding success, and the famous baseball star now served as the face of his family's commercials, proving that everything was connected from the very beginning. What do you think about this movie? Leave a comment below to let us know. Thanks for watching.